It was my honor and it was my pleasure to be accompanied today by our new colleague, Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva from the great state of Arizona. She accompanied me to the floor. I tried to get recognition.
Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule 1, the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on Friday, October 24, 2025.
I asked for recognition because I wanted to move a unanimous consent motion that the Speaker of the House be directed to move on the next legislative day, tomorrow, to swear in Ms. Grijalva, and yet he turned away, he pretended he didn't notice me, and he scurried out of the room, which to me is disgraceful. We need to act on this. Ms. Grijalva's hundreds of thousands of constituents deserve to be represented in Congress. And even during these pro forma sessions, all of us who are members of Congress, including Congresswoman-elect Grijalva, can introduce legislation. But Ms. Grijalva, as I understand it, I'll let her tell you about it, she is not able to do constituent work for her constituents. We are trying to get in touch with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the VA every day on behalf of our constituents. Meantime, she's got constituent requests piling up on a desk, and I'd be very interested to hear you talk, Adelita, about what resources you have and what resources you don't have. But we consider you an elected member of Congress. There's no right or power that's been invoked by Speaker Johnson as to why he continues to refuse to swear her in. So I'm just here to endorse all the demands of our leadership. We should bring Congress back. The Republicans should get back to Washington, and we should restore all of the health care that's been savagely cut by the Republicans' dreadful, awful bill, and we should swear in our new colleague, and we should move forward with the business of the people. I am very pleased to introduce you to Adelita Grijalva, our most newly elected member of Congress who continues to wait to be sworn in.
Thank you. Thank you. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Thank you, Leader Jeffries and Ranking Member Raskin, for the opportunity to speak here, and for, I think this is the 5th time that a member of Congress has tried to get some recognition in order to have me sworn in. Today is day 28 since my election. And I think that it's really important that we appreciate that 812,000 Arizonans do not have representation in Congress. My dad passed away a little over 7 months ago in March. And since that time, the offices were able to provide constituent services. It was the People's Office of Arizona CD7. On September 23rd, those services ended. And so I do not have access to provide services in district. And I think that I also don't have a budget. So this back and forth, coming back and forth, is on my miles that I had stored up because I don't have a budget. I'm not able to open a lease in district. And I think that, the efforts that have been provided to me, and I'm appreciative of the administration's effort, the departments and the administration, they're trying to provide piecemeal solutions to some of the problems that we have. But respectfully, there's so much that cannot be done until I am sworn in. And so every moment that passes that I'm not able to provide constituent services or be a voice for Arizona, I can't bring the issues forward that they sent me here to do. And so while we're getting a lot of attention for not being sworn in, I'd rather get the attention for doing my job. And I can't do that right now without being sworn in. And it's just notable to continue to mention, there were 2 Republican members that were sworn in less than 24 hours from the date of their special election, April 1st. They were sworn in less than 24 hours, April 2nd, on a pro forma session. It's not unheard of for this speaker to do that. And so I continue to ask for us to have the same opportunity and for the 812,000 people in Arizona that do not have a voice right now to have the opportunity to have me here representing them. Thank you.
Director Patel, before you joined the FBI, you railed against it for covering up Jeffrey Epstein's human trafficking ring. Let me refresh your memory with this clip.
It has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. That doesn't seem like something you should do. You're protecting the world's foremost predator. That seems like an evil thing to do, regardless of who may be embarrassed in the release of that list. Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale pederast in human history?
Simple, because of who's on that list.
So you finished that December 2023 interview with a challenge to the FBI and harsh words for Republicans in Congress for not getting the Epstein files out to the public. You can see this clip.
Boy pants, and let us know who the pedophiles are.
Put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are, you said. You emphasized that the president and FBI director each had complete authority to release Epstein's client list. You said Epstein's black book is under the, quote, direct control of the director of the FBI. Look at this clip.
This is way off the topic, but who has Jeffrey Epstein's
Black Book?
black book?
FBI.
But who? That is, I mean,
Oh,
there's...
that's under direct control of the director of the FBI.
All right, so you were sworn in as director more than 200 days ago. Now the black book is under your direct control. So why haven't you released the names of Epstein's co-conspirators in the rape and sex trafficking of young women and girls?
The Rolodex, which is what everybody colloquially refers to as the Black Book, has been released.
Oh, no, you're talking about what the journalist got 5 years ago? No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what you were talking about there,
That's
the black
exactly
book
what I
under
was
the direct
talking.
control of the FBI director.
We have released more material than anyone else before. The Biden administration, Obama administration had the exact opportunities to release this material, and they never did. And if you are telling the men and women of the FBI,
Why
we're
have
not
you
going after
changed your
child predators.
position?
Hang on, you said we're not going after child predators. 1,500 child predators arrested this year, 35%
Okay,
increase,
I'll reclaim my time.
4,700 child victims
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to
found.
reclaim my time if you could instruct the witness. Why have you changed your position? There you were saying it's under the direct control of the FBI director and all of it should be released. Why have you changed your
Everything
position?
that has been lawfully permitted to be released has been released. And as I told you,
Really?
the investigation was limited. And let me make something crystal clear. I never said Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic other people, other women, and they're not other victims. This is the investigation we were given from 2006, 7, and 8, and the search warrants from 2006, 7, and 8. That's what we're working with.
Well, wait, have you released all of the stuff that the FBI has seized from Epstein's house? The computers, the emails, the file cabinets, the documents? What about the financial records? Have you released all of that?
Everything the court has allowed us to
Which
release.
court are you talking about?
3 separate federal courts have come in and said.
We're
there are
talking about the
3
evidence you've got. It's got nothing to do with what those courts have.
Do you have any
We're talking
idea
about the
how the
evidence.
law works?
Wait.
Do you want me to break the law in a federal judge's order?
No,
to
I want you to
satisfy
follow your own
curiosity?
word, Director Patel. You said up there it was under the direct control of the FBI director. He had the black
And
book.
everything I have direct control over, we have gone to court. You haven't.
Complete
We
your
went
sentence.
to court.
Everything you have direct
We-
control over, you
we
said.
have gone to court, and everything we have direct
Director
control
Patel,
over.
complete your
and
sentence.
can
You said everything-
lawfully
I'd like to
release.
the
We are
gentleman-
releasing.
He'd like to complete his answer.
You began the sentence, everything you have direct control over, and then you stopped that sentence. You've released everything that you have direct control over?
And I have direct control over and can lawfully release. If you're not familiar with the court orders, that's not my fault.
Oh, I'm
Go
perfectly,
look at them.
I'm
Go
perfectly
to
familiar
court.
with them. But how did we prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell?
She was prosecuted with the investigatory material that was collected from 2001 and 2005 because of the non-prosecution agreements and the court orders on the investigations and search warrants. We were not able to develop new information. And oh, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein was out for 12 years, and the Obama and Biden administration did nothing to look at his work, his pedophile network. If you want to blame me, that's fine. But now you're blaming the men and women who conducted
No,
this
stop
great
that.
search.
I'm not blaming anybody other than you. You're not keeping your word. You said that you would release all of the materials
Has
under your
anyone
direct
released
control.
more information on Epstein than I have? Has
Well,
anyone?
much
did
more-
Comey, did Ray?
Much
Did
more.
they?
Excuse me. Much more has come out in the days since the American people in Congress have been demanding it. But it's coming out in dribs and drabs. Why don't you just release the entire file as you promised to do?
I literally just told you, there are multiple federal court orders. I'm not going to break the law to satisfy your curiosity. You didn't join us when we filed court to release the court orders. You could have. You have lawyers. You could have shown up. You didn't do that.
That's a tiny fraction of the material we're
That
talking
is
about.
not.
It is
How
a
do you-
tiny fraction.
How do you know that? Have you seen everything?
It's all misdirected.
How do you know
Time
that?
of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California is recognized.
In the UK, Mr. Farage is openly promoting the abolition of the Human Rights Act of 1998 to be replaced with a British Bill of Rights that limits the right of free speech to British citizens and legally sanctioned residents. He complains that racist threats against immigrants are not protected free speech, while he proposes to strip migrants, tourists, and perhaps even visiting American congresspeople of any free speech rights at all. I had my own close encounter with that when Mr. Farage and his team presented for more than an hour in a conversation we had about free speech. And after 3 minutes of talking, he cut me off and terminated the meeting because he didn't like what I was saying. That's the kind of free speech he's committed to. There is a free speech crisis in America today, but there's no free speech crisis in Britain. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has not shut down GB News, where Mr. Farage has his own show, just because Mr. Farage has used his airtime to call for banning peaceful protests that he disagrees with. No one has stopped him from going on Russian TV 17 times and saying also and repeating that the one world political leader he most admired was Vladimir Putin, even though Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and a dictator who has regularly interfered in other countries' democratic elections. No one has stopped Mr. Farage from parroting Putin's absurd talking points, like when Farage claimed that NATO, the US, and Britain provoked this war in Ukraine. For a man who fashions himself as some kind of a free speech martyr, Mr. Farage seems most at home with the autocrats and dictators of the world who are crushing freedom on earth. Mr. Farage wants to get rid of the Online Safety Act in his country, a law shepherded by the Conservative Party and implemented by the Labor Party, which bans child pornography online, protects children from harmful content, forbids non-consensual pornography and other unlawful content. He should go and advance the positions he's taking here in Congress today in Parliament, which is meeting today, if he's serious about it. To the people of UK who think this Putin-loving free speech imposter and Trump sycophant will protect freedom in your country, come on over to America and see what Trump and MAGA are doing to destroy our freedom, kidnap college students off the street, ban books from our libraries, militarize our police and unleash them against our communities, take over our universities, wreck our professional civil service, and turn the government into a money-making machine for Trump and his family. You might think twice before you let Mr. Farage make Britain great again. You know, it must be tough to be an authoritarian. You promise everybody in the world to get elected. Prices will go down on day one. No more inflation. We're going to end Russia's war on Ukraine. The world's going to respect us. And then you get in, and even though you inherit an economy from your predecessor that's described as the envy of the world by The Economist magazine, you crash everything. Mr. Speaker, I found the preamble to this big, ugly bill. We, the billionaires, and our king, in order to deform and sicken our union, establish injustice, ensure domestic servility, weaken our people's defenses, undermine the general welfare, and reserve to ourselves and our posterity staggering debt servitude for eternity, do hereby instruct the Republicans in Congress to strip 17 million people of their health care, increase co-pays, deductibles, and premiums for everyone else, cut 42 million people off of nutritional assistance, increase the national debt by $4 trillion, trash renewable energy systems, increase our electric bills for the carbon kings, all to weaken and destroy the Constitution of the people of these United States of America. Please include this preamble in the legislative record. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Sometimes our colleagues will say, we have three co-equal branches. Really? First of all, co-equal is not even a word, okay? Secondly, if we're co-equal, why is it that Congress has the power to impeach, try, and convict a president and remove a president, but the president doesn't have the power to impeach, try, convict, and remove us. Pointing fingers is for losers. I'm quoting our colleague, Representative Chip Roy, from last week. And this has become a mantra for our colleagues in the wake of the devastating flooding in Texas, which cost already 132 lives, with still 160 people missing. It's now an article of faith among our colleagues that in the age of climate change disasters, like Hurricane Helene, which cost 200 lives in North Carolina, or deadly tornadoes in the Midwest, you name it, in the age of out-of-control gun violence, whether in Uvalde or Buffalo or Charleston or Parkland, we should never engage in finger-pointing or casting blame or attributing responsibility to individuals. Although, of course, Donald Trump finger points and casts blame at Democratic leaders, as he did recently with Governor Newsom with the wildfires in California. But in any event, the point is, we don't really want to know which individuals are responsible. We should be addressing the underlying systemic problems like climate change, effective emergency response and planning, or mass gun violence and reducing access to military-style assault weapons, rather than vilifying people and casting blame on a partisan basis. Fine, let's adopt that rule. Finger pointing is for losers. For this committee, no to finger pointing, yes to problem solving. But this entire hearing is nothing but absurd political finger pointing. And it's not even finger pointing at people who actually run our government or occupy public office. It's finger pointing at not-for-profit groups like Church World Service or HIAS, Lutheran Community Services, and the reviled philanthropist George Soros, who has given away hundreds of millions of dollars to make the world a better place. I don't like everything that every right-wing, not-for-profit group does in America or around the world, but I don't think it merits a full-blown congressional hearing. We didn't even have a hearing on the richest billionaire in the world, Elon Musk, who actually had a government job running Doge, destroying large parts of our government, firing tens of thousands of our federal workers. The Republicans didn't even call in Elon Musk for a hearing or have a hearing about what he was doing, but they want to have a hearing in 2025 about George Soros, all of the old, tired, exhausted, absurd conspiracy theories again. And I don't see any, and these witnesses can correct me if I'm wrong, I perused all their statements. I didn't see a single one of them allege a single crime, anything illegal going on. They just don't like the things that he invests in. They don't like what certain not-for-profit groups do. Well, I don't love everything that the right-wing not-for-profits do. Why are we having a hearing about this? What an absurd waste of time. The American people across the political spectrum are now demanding the release of the complete Epstein file. This is what President Trump and Vice President Vance and the whole Trump team was demanding up until the last couple weeks when President Trump suddenly decided he wanted to sweep the whole thing under the rug. So there are now two approaches in Congress. We've got a bipartisan binding law which has teeth to compel disclosure of all the relevant material that America wants to see. But on the other hand, the Republicans in the Rules Committee just unveiled a meaningless, hortatory, fig leaf, Swiss cheese resolution that has no teeth at all. It doesn't even have dentures. It's all cavities, what they've offered. So we've got a choice now. We can go with a bill that would actually have teeth for enforcement, or a meaningless hortatory resolution that has all the legal force of National Chrysanthemum Month. Now, the original Massey bill asks for a comprehensive release from the Attorney General. And it's binding, which means if they don't turn it over, we can go to court. It's comprehensive, it includes everything from flight logs and travel records to individuals, including government officials, named or referenced in connection with all of Epstein's criminal activities, all of the entities involved. We want to know about all the immunity deals. And it even tries to deter and account for destruction, deletion, alteration, misplacement, or concealment of documents and records. All of that falls out of this fraudulent resolution they've thrown up at the last minute here. There's nothing in there except for a series of qualifying weasel words which are added to give complete unilateral subjective discretion to the Attorney General. Can I have 30 seconds more? To give complete discretion to the Attorney General to decide what should be in and what should be out. So it starts off by saying, whereas our resolution says all documents, records, and communications, theirs says all credible documents, records, and communications. Well, who's going to decide that? Attorney General Bondi, in conjunction with Donald Trump, who today said that a letter that he wrote to Jeffrey Epstein on his birthday, which is published, which has all of the indicia of credibility, is not credible. That wouldn't be included. Let's release the real Epstein file. This week's events show how MAGA has turned American justice completely upside down and inside out. Over the last week, we've been talking about a single rogue DOJ employee who unilaterally canceled more than $500 million in Department of Justice grants to local law enforcement and victims' rights organizations and those assisting the victims of rape and sexual assault across the country. That's what right-wing policies do. I would say to my friend, the chair of the full committee, we tried to restore that money. Nobody seemed to know how any of this happened, but our colleagues didn't utter a word against our amendment, and yet they all voted against it. What else happened? Well, a 33-year-old January 6 rioter who assaulted our police officers at the Capitol, and he smashed the glass pane through which Ashley Babbitt climbed before she was fatally shot by a Capitol officer, was arrested again yesterday. This time they got him for burglarizing neighbors' homes. This was a guy who was pardoned by President Trump, now robbing houses in Virginia. This Zachary Alam was serving an 8-year sentence after a jury convicted him of 7 criminal felonies and 3 misdemeanors when President Trump granted him clemency as part of the mass pardon of 1,600 insurrectionists and rioters for the thousands of crimes committed on that day. At sentencing, U.S. District Court Judge Friedrich described the testimony of police who recalled Alam as, quote, by far the loudest, most combative, and most violent of the January 6 rioters who attacked the police in the part of the Capitol that these officers were defending. And yesterday, the Trump Department of Justice agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, the rioter who tried to storm the House Speaker's lobby on January 6 after she broke into the Capitol and after the aforementioned Mr. Alam broke that window. The Department of Justice originally took the position that her wrongful death lawsuit brought by her family was wholly without merit, no basis, and that Babbitt's civil rights had never been violated by the police, and that the police officer acted reasonably in defense of members of Congress and in defense of Vice President Pence. A Capitol Police investigation cleared the officer involved, saying his actions at the height of the riot, quote, potentially saved members and staff from serious injury and possible death from a large crowd of rioters who had forced their way into the Capitol, into the House chamber, where members and staff were steps away. In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, I think the police officer did his job. Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioter's family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President, a plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages and, quote, political prisoners. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist group like Hamas and held for a financial or political ransom. A political prisoner is someone like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela, who's been imprisoned for ideological reasons, not for violently assaulting the police or engaging in seditious conspiracy or destroying federal property. But the administration's effort to create big news yesterday was Trump's acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, a blatantly partisan prosecutor who has bragged about working to turn New Jersey red. Well, she announced her intention to indict our colleague, Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, on charges of assaulting, resisting, and obstructing law enforcement based on the now famous May 9th incident outside of Delaney Hall, an ICE detention facility in McIver's district, where she was conducting a scheduled oversight visit with other members of Congress, including our 80-year-old colleague, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and the mayor of Newark. Well, Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company GEO, a major Republican donor that gave $1 million to Make America Great Again, Inc., and has faced numerous lawsuits for its treatment of detainees and unsafe conditions. The members had a lawful right to be there and to investigate, and even after ICE initiated a scuffle to arrest the mayor of Newark on public property, the House members were let in to tour the facility to conduct nonviolent oversight, and the tour went smoothly. This indictment is a manifest fraud, clearly designed to distract America this week from the administration's savage and unpopular effort to strip 14 million Americans of their Medicaid and health coverage and 11 million Americans of Head Start, Meals on Wheels, and other nutritional assistance programs like SNAP. Representative McIver was, of course, executing one of the core duties of a member of Congress, oversight, pursuant to her precise statutory right to enter and visit an ICE facility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that oversight is a central element of the legislative process because if we can't research the facts on the ground, we don't know what laws to pass. This, for the Department of Justice to charge McIver with assault is an outrage against the Constitution, which protects members of Congress from civil and criminal prosecution for performance of their core legislative duties. It is also a scandal in light of the DOJ's constant backing of cop-beating insurrectionists, including with the shocking policy that these pardons can even apply to criminal charges wholly unrelated to the events of January 6th, as well as the DOJ's jaw-dropping decision to fire more than a dozen senior criminal prosecutors simply because they had worked on the January 6th case. Yet now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6 insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11. No police officers or ICE agents were injured at Delaney Hall. No one died. No one had a heart attack like Officer Fanone did. There were no strokes. There were no broken jaws, no broken necks. Nobody was forced out of police work like Sergeant Gonell was. Yet we've got members of Congress who would gladly jettison the speech and debate clause, which protects all of us in our work, the First Amendment, and the Article I powers of Congress to score a few cheap political points at the expense of their own colleagues. In Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired, so Donald Trump can continue to pander to his private militia of pardoned rioters and insurrectionists and a reserve army of extremists who've proven themselves willing to stand back and stand by. Let me show you what a real assault on police officers looks like. If you'd roll the tape. Mr. Chairman, if this is an oversight hearing on ICE and ICE believes a real assault took place in New Jersey, where are they? Why are they not present today? The star of the show is absent, and that, my friends, is no oversight. I yield back. This hearing, if our motto is going to be finger pointings for losers, this hearing is for losers. Because all it is finger pointing at somebody who doesn't even have political power. This is an oversight hearing before the Oversight Subcommittee that's not doing any oversight on the government. Indeed, the Judiciary Committee has not yet conducted a single oversight meeting this Congress with a single government witness. Not one. They've not called Attorney General Bondi. They've not called FBI Director Patel. They haven't even called anybody to talk about George Soros from the government. They won't subject any of their government officials to any cross-examination by this panel. Now, I think this is an absurd waste of our time. Why are we not addressing urgent policy problems like the pervasive nationwide violation of due process and First Amendment rights by ICE and other federal agents who arrive now in unmarked cars, in plain clothes, without badges or arrest warrants, and then snatch people off the streets and send them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador? Do you think the United States House of Representatives Judiciary Committee should have an interest in defending due process? So my colleagues say, you're not for due process for guilty people, are you? Well, yeah, because we don't know if they're guilty until they've gotten due process. That's why due process are the two most beautiful words in the English language. So it separates our rights and our freedoms from arbitrary state power. Why are we not addressing the threats to the security and safety of judges who are working to uphold the rule of law and now are subject not just to slander and defamation and signs all over Congress saying impeach this judge or that judge for standing up for the Constitution? Now, violent threats, not just to them, but to their family members. Why are we not addressing the mass firing of dozens of experienced crime-fighting federal prosecutors at the Department of Justice who've been fired en masse for the sole reason that they did their job and prosecuted police beaters, violent insurrectionists, and other rioters who attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021 in order to overthrow a presidential election in the United States of America and attack our Constitution? Why are we not having a hearing about that? We could actually have a hearing. Here's something we could agree on, Mr. Chairman, on a bipartisan basis. Why don't we have a hearing on what the whole country's talking about right now? If you turn on TV and go on the internet, why don't we have a hearing about the continuing suppression and cover-up of the information in the Epstein files about a child sex ring run by powerful people? The whole country, not just Republicans and MAGA, but liberal Democrats are in an uproar because President Trump, Attorney General Bondi, and their allies in the DOJ and FBI repeatedly claimed in public that the Epstein files have the names of power elite actors involved in human trafficking and sexual abuse of minors with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and they promised to release all the information in the name of maximal transparency. You remember that? They said this would be the most transparent administration in the history of the United States. But now they're shouting nothing to see here, sweeping it all under the rug, steadfastly refusing to release the files despite broad bipartisan demand to release the Epstein files after everything they've said publicly. The Democratic members of this committee sent a letter today at 2 p.m. demanding that the president keep his word and release the files to the American people, and that Chairman Jordan call a bipartisan hearing where we can work together to get to the bottom of this. How about a hearing on that? Do any of my colleagues want to talk about that, or does everybody want to talk about George Soros? I'm curious to know which of my colleagues support our call for a bipartisan hearing on the Epstein files. So here we are, this utterly pointless hearing, spinning absurd, discredited conspiracy theories, again about George Soros. And again, I don't see a single claim of any criminality or illegality taking place. They don't like the guy's politics. I can find you 50 right-wing billionaires whose politics I don't like. So what? What an utter absurd waste of time this is. And it's an attempt to change the subject, obviously from what America wants to talk about now, which is why, after promising for all of these years to release the Epstein files, will President Trump not release them? And we know they were friends, and we know they hung out, and we know there are all these pictures together. We know that Michael Wolff, Trump's biographer, said he saw photographs of Donald Trump and Epstein with minor-age girls. Well, where does that leave us? That doesn't look good if they then cover up all the information. Come clean and release the information, as the Republicans have repeatedly promised to do. So I look forward to hearing if there's any allegations of criminality or illegality. They should be turned over immediately to the Department of Justice today. Otherwise, this hearing, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, is for losers. It's about finger pointing at people who don't have any governmental power at all. It's old, recycled allegations, and we're not advancing the ball on anything. At the very least, the Judiciary Committee should be demanding that the Epstein files be made public. That is a bipartisan agenda. At least I thought it was. And if something has changed, please let me know. But I thought that we were all for that together, and we should move on that today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Ranking Member, I thank you for your testimony and fundamentally disagree with you on everything. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. And we're now going to introduce today's...
And please elaborate, if you would, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to hear it.
I don't want to hold up the whole hearing, so it would take a considerable amount of time. It really would. And I want to give these fine gentlemen a chance from both sides of the aisle to place their testimony into the record. But we certainly could do that, and we may as we move along.
The framers, the founders, were most seriously afraid of a president who would act like a mad king, drunk on power, avaricious and determined to take all other powers unto himself. Madison, in the Federalist Papers, defined tyranny as the collapse of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, into one power. That was the very definition of it. Well, Section 2 names the president commander-in-chief, not of the country, not of the government, but of the Army and Navy and the militias in times of actual service. So what is the core job of the president? The core job of the president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. In other words, take the laws that have been passed by the House, by the Senate, signed into law by the president, and execute them, implement them. The president gets his powers only from two places, the Constitution says, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly reaffirmed. The president gets his power either directly from the Constitution or directly from a grant of Congress. And that's it. That's the whole meaning of the Supreme Court's decision in the Steele seizure case in 1952. There are no other powers that the president gets just by virtue of being the commander-in-chief or being the president. Well, Article 3 vests all judicial power in the Supreme Court and inferior courts to clarify legal rights and responsibilities in actual cases and controversies. As the court put it in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison, it's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. No, Vice President Vance, it's not up to the president to define what the limits are on the power of the president. That's up to the Supreme Court. That's the whole meaning of judicial review in Marbury versus Madison. As Senator Durbin says, we must defend the independence and the integrity and the security of the judicial branch of government. And when 4 federal judges, 2 of them appointed by Democrats, 2 of them appointed by Republicans, struck down Donald Trump's executive order purporting to nullify birthright citizenship under the Constitution, a number of our colleagues in the House began to call for the impeachment of these judges without explaining what they had done wrong, without explaining any fallacy in their analysis, just calling for their impeachment. There have only been 15 federal judges impeached in all of American history by the Congress of the United States. And it's always for corruption or bribery or income tax evasion. It's for actually engaging in a crime, a high crime or misdemeanor, not because the Congress disagrees with their analysis, much less because Congress disagrees with their correct analysis of a legal problem. It's never happened before. The Bill of Rights was added to protect the rights and freedoms of the people against abuse by the government, whether it's a Congress passing laws that infringe on liberty, or a president making up laws, usurping congressional powers, or violating constitutional rights, or indeed states trespassing the rights of the people. Now, here's the amazing thing. The framers understood, like Lord Acton, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so they arranged a constitutional system where power would be vertically divided, shared and distributed between the federal government and the states and localities, as well as horizontally distributed among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. And the branches would check one another's abusive ambitions, and the people would exercise their freedoms of speech, press, assembly, petition of government, and so on to counterbalance the tyrannical propensities of government generally. We're in a dramatic constitutional confrontation today where every facet of the framers' design has been activated to try and save constitutional democracy and freedom. From the day he took office, Trump has tried to exercise powers like a king, trampling the rights of the people, usurping the powers of Congress, denouncing judges and threatening to defy the rulings of courts, and violating the legitimate authority of states and their elected officials. Last Saturday, June 14th, which was Flag Day and the president's birthday, he chose to stage a $45 million military parade in the streets of Washington. In response, at least 7 million anti-monarchical Americans assembled in over 2,000 protests in cities and towns across America for the unveiling of No King's Day, a magnificent demonstration of the inextinguishable resiliency of popular constitutional democracy in the face of dictatorial designs against the people. But the people marching in the streets from Philadelphia to Los Angeles, from the boundary waters of Minnesota to New Orleans, are not alone in this process. They reflect a powerful constitutional opposition in motion. Political leaders at the state level are fighting back in court along with their allies in Congress, and we are winning this fight every day in courtrooms across America. More than 328 lawsuits have been filed since Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Elon Musk took office, and federal courts across the land have remarkably issued 197 preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. The witnesses before us today, the attorney generals for the people of Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Illinois, are leaders in the fight for the Constitution and federal laws that have been abandoned by the president. And these chief state lawyers are winning significant battles in front of judges appointed by both Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. They are even winning in courts where judges preside who were appointed by President Trump himself. State attorneys general have brought at least 30 lawsuits against the new administration, successfully blocking many of its most reckless and lawless actions. They challenged Trump's efforts to nullify birthright citizenship and won injunctions to stop the order. They challenged Trump's funding freeze and won a court order forcing Trump to lift the freeze and deliver the funds to state and local programs. And when Trump didn't pay up, they went back to court to make him comply. They challenged DOJ's unconstitutional gathering of private data on millions of Americans, and just a few weeks ago won a ruling that will allow the suit to move forward. They sued when the administration tried to claw back billions of dollars in public health money and won an injunction against the rescission so that these funds would be delivered to the people of the states and localities. They sued to stop Trump's policies to dismantle voting rights and won a temporary injunction against major portions of his order requiring every citizen in America to prove their citizenship every time they go to vote. Trump's push against the rights of the people is losing in court, with judges striking down unconstitutional orders and issuing scathing rebukes to his lawlessness. Judge John Kuhnor said of the Trump's birthright citizenship order, "I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear as this." He went on to ask, where were the lawyers when the decision was made to sign this executive order, and said that it boggled his mind that any member of the bar would contend the order was constitutional. This is a judge who was appointed by Ronald Reagan to the bench. Congressional Democrats have joined the state attorney generals in this fight, although we're limited in what we can bring ourselves by virtue of very restrictive legal standing doctrines against members of Congress suing the president. We have filed detailed amicus briefs in support of the state attorney general's suits, identifying our unique interests and unyielding determination to defend federal laws we have passed against executive usurpation. Of course, we have won some and we've lost some, and we would expect nothing less under the rule of law. But we will defend the rule of law. We will not be intimidated by Trump's threats and authoritarian tactics. Those of us who aspire to and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people, and the people are sovereign, and we all serve in the interest of the people. To every state AG who is with us today, and to those who are not here but are in this battle also for the rule of law, I say on behalf of all of our colleagues, it's an honor to be in this fight with you. Congressional Democrats are proud to stand with you in this fight to protect our Constitution, its values, and the rights of our people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. The economy today is shrinking. The stock market is sinking. Inflation is soaring. $7 trillion in American retirements and wealth has been destroyed. You've plunged us with your imbecilic tariffs into a trade war with the whole world, except, of course, for your bosom buddies in Russia. So now, only 100 days in, with 100 unforced policy blunders, you're the most unpopular president at this point in your presidency in more than 80 years. Barack Obama stood at 69% in the polls. Ronald Reagan was at 73% in the polls. Truman was 87%, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, 68%. But Donald Trump is at 39%, the lowest 100-day approval rating since polling began. He controlled the agenda. For 100 days, he controlled the House, he controlled the Senate, he's got everything going for him, and his numbers are in the gutter. So now he reaches back into the authoritarian playbook. Go back and please the wealthiest people and corporations in the country. House Republicans want to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid, food assistance for mothers and children, veterans benefits, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, any programs that help actual people, all in order to pay for another gargantuan tax break for the president's billionaire benefactors. And here in the Judiciary Committee, our good friends want to help Donald Trump use his power in violation of the Constitution that we are all sworn to uphold and defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. Every day, the administration uses immigration enforcement as a template to erode constitutional rights and liberties. They round up people in the street and disappear them to the torture prison of a foreign dictator without 1 minute of due process, sweeping up completely innocent people who have no criminal record and no criminal charges, in the midst of other people who may have criminal records and criminal charges and should stand prosecution for them if they do have charges against them. They're stripping college and graduate students at American universities of their visas for writing op-eds that the administration disagrees with. They invoke emergency wartime powers like the Alien Enemies Act to fight a military invasion at the border while telling us that the border has never been safer than it is right now. My colleagues say all these measures are necessary to deport gang members, violent criminals, the worst of the worst. But they're not targeting the worst of the worst. They're arresting judges now. They're using federal agents to round up law-abiding members of the community with no criminal records, parents of American children, husbands and wives of American spouses, people who have not been shown to pose any public safety threat at all. They're breaking into cars to arrest mothers as their children's watch in terror. They're arresting people who are coming in for their citizenship interviews. They're staking out people's homes and trolling through IRS taxpayer data in search of tax-paying people to deport. Look, We know how to remove people from the country who should not be here. President Biden's administration did that. We know how to do it legally, consistent with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But the Trump administration has discarded the rule of law. If he can sweep non-citizens off the street and fly them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador with no due process, he can do it to citizens too. Because if there's no due process, if there's no fair hearing, you've got no opportunity to object. And indeed, several American citizen children, including one with cancer, were flown to Honduras last week with no due process, as a Trump-appointed judge in Louisiana found. Now the courts have issued more than 95 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. But Republicans want to enable President Trump to keep going. This Judiciary Committee bill seeks to strip the courts of their power to hold an administration in contempt when the president violates explicit judicial court orders. And it doesn't stop there. While they try to defund the courts, they're forking over an astonishing $81 billion to the administration for more of these immigration roundups. The legislation includes a whopping $45 billion for ICE on top of its annual budget of $9 billion for family and adult detention centers alone. This bill is a blank check to the administration to do more of what we've already seen. And to make matters worse, as they race to spend more than $81 additional billion on this, Trump's own DOJ is terminating hundreds of millions of dollars in existing grants. They're cutting funding for county, state, and local law enforcement. They're cutting funding for opioid addiction treatment programs. They're cutting funding for crime prevention, and they're cutting funding for victims of rape, sexual assault, and violent crimes. The grants being cut support local police in solving and preventing crime. They help the survivors of abuse and assault navigate the legal system, and yet they're being wiped out by the Department of Justice. They're also trying to handcuff the agencies that work to make sure our food and drugs are safe and our air and water are clean. The REINS Act is buried in here. It would prevent the government from enforcing our civil rights, protecting workplace safety, and guarding against misconduct by banks. It would require both houses of Congress and the president to approve every major rule from our agencies to take effect, virtually guaranteeing no effective regulatory action on any subject. They've also tucked the Midnight Rules Relief Act in here, which would allow Republicans to bundle hundreds of regulations all together into a single package and vote them down on a single jumbo resolution, which would be used to hide the most destructive deregulatory votes among dozens of others, completely burying it in darkness. Look, this version of an authoritarian America is not what the American people want. Please take note. This is why Donald Trump's polling numbers are in the gutter and an historic low. This is not what the American people are looking for. We urge our colleagues to walk back from the brink here to support many amendments we plan to offer today that will save us money, that will actually address the real problems of the country, and that will protect the constitutional rights and freedoms that we cherish so much in America. This is a test. Are we going to stand up for the majority of the American people, for our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and the freedoms we fought for, or are we going to stand with a president who wants to throw it all away? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Welcome, Director Patel. You and I have not had the opportunity to meet, and alas, you failed to respond to the 8 oversight letters I've sent you over the last 7 months. So we do have a lot of questions piling up for you, but I want to start with a word of praise. The first FBI director was J. Edgar Hoover, who steadfastly refused to hire women, African Americans, and other minorities as agents. And although he was a closeted homosexual who lived in domestic partnership for decades with Clyde Tolson, he also participated in anti-gay crusades. He aggressively promoted what we would today call white Christian nationalism. And he would undoubtedly be turning over in his grave to see as one of his successors a first-generation Indian American and a proud Hindu. So I congratulate you on being a breakthrough in this sense and being a beneficiary of the civil rights movement that opened up the FBI and the federal workforce to lots of people who never would have been hired in its first decades. Alas, you share J. Edgar Hoover's dangerous obsession with blind loyalty over professionalism and effective public policy. For Hoover, it was blind loyalty to him in keeping his secrets. For you, it's blind loyalty to Donald Trump in keeping his secrets. During your confirmation, it was widely noted on all sides that your primary qualification was your unwavering loyalty to Trump. Unlike other directors, you had no work experience at the FBI, but you had made over 1,000 media and political appearances in support of Trump's campaign. Your Senate confirmation vote was 51-49, the closest in history, with your opponents warning you were not qualified and had no interest in actually developing the qualifications for the job. I hoped that they were wrong. Alas, they were not. While most other new FBI directors drew on their experience as FBI agents, you didn't have that. But you did write a picture book trilogy for children ages 5 and up based on your experience clashing with President Trump's political enemies. In your book, you describe your literary alter ego, Cash the Knight, as a wacky, easily bored wizard carrying out King Donald's vengeance by driving his enemies out of the kingdom. In the books, King Donald is besieged by the evil Hillary Queentown, but saved in the end by Cash. Then Cash goes on to catch mules who are stealing the 2020 election for the great King Donald from Sleepy Joe. And then in the third book, Cash takes down the dragon of the jalapenos, nicknamed the DOJ. Your supporters had hoped that you would graduate from imagining yourself a romantic fairy tale knight to actually running America's premier federal law enforcement agency. Alas, just as we've learned how dangerous it is to put a science-denying anti-vaxxer in charge of our public health, we've learned how dangerous it is to name as director of the FBI a man who thinks of himself as a fairy tale knight who keeps a fire-breathing dragon named DOJ at home to forcibly drive villains out of the kingdom. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, while his killer was still on the loose, you decided you didn't need to be at FBI headquarters in Washington to work with your team while the chaotic manhunt unfolded. You spent your evening dining in a swanky Midtown Manhattan restaurant and tweeting out false information that the subject of the shooting was in custody, a statement you had to retract 1 hour later. Your performance was so disturbing that even the MAGA base was alarmed. Culture warrior Christopher Rufo, who just a few months ago sat in your chair as a Republican witness, observed that you performed terribly, and he called for your ouster. The FBI might be able to survive your delusions of grandeur and the explosively volatile temper that was on display yesterday in the Senate, but the intractable problem is that you are running the FBI not as a law enforcement agency charged with keeping the American people safe, but as a political enforcement agency working directly for the president's vengeance campaign. 7 months in, it's impossible to overstate the destruction, chaos, and demoralization you've brought to the FBI and its workforce and the resulting danger your actions have caused to our country. You've been systematically purging the FBI of its most experienced and qualified agents, division leaders, and experts in counterterror, counterintelligence, and cybersecurity, precisely the people who have the expertise you lack and which the FBI and the country need. They've been expelled from the ranks of the Bureau simply because they did their duty investigating crimes, including those committed by the mob that attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and beat the hell out of more than 140 police officers, or simply because you suspected them of being insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. You illegally sacked Brian Driscoll, the former acting director of the Bureau and a decorated counterterrorism expert who worked at the FBI for nearly 20 years. According to Driscoll, you told him your own job, quote, depended on the removal of agents who worked on the cases against the president, regardless of whether the agents chose to work on those cases or not. You added, quote, the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he hasn't forgotten it. You forced out the leader of the Salt Lake City field office, Mehtab Saeed, just weeks before Charlie Kirk's assassination, depriving the FBI of an experienced counterterrorism expert described by her colleagues as absolutely the best and legendary. She would have led the FBI's manhunt had she not been fired. When Trump decided that rounding up immigrants with no criminal records was more important than preventing crimes, like human trafficking of women and girls, drug dealing, terrorism, and fraud, you ordered the 25 largest field offices to divert thousands of agents away from chasing down violent criminals, sex traffickers, fraudsters, and scammers to carry out this immigration crackdown. Director Patel, you treated the men and women at FBI with disrespect and paranoia. You've assembled a roving band of freelancing henchmen within your office and charged them with conducting unauthorized investigations, targeting and harassing career FBI employees. Amazingly, you forced senior leadership to repeatedly take polygraph tests to prove their political loyalty and pushed out leaders who refused these demeaning exercises. And now we're seeing one very clear reason why you want to build a political FBI. The Epstein files. You want an FBI blindly loyal to Trump and to you as his enforcer so you can continue your cover-up of a massive international sex trafficking ring with more than 1,000 victims, betraying all of the survivors of the sexual violence. Before you got in this job, you called for full release of the Epstein files, telling podcaster Benny Johnson that the only reason the list was not released by DOJ and FBI was, quote, because of who's on that list. Upon your confirmation, you promised that, quote, there will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, no stone left unturned. And anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. This spring, you ordered hundreds of agents to pore over all the Epstein files, but not to look for more clues about the money network or the network of human traffickers. You pulled these agents from their regular counterterrorism or drug trafficking duties to work around the clock, some of them sleeping at their desks, to conduct a frantic search to make sure Donald Trump's name and image were flagged and redacted wherever they appeared, whether an email, a text, a letter, an interview, a photograph, or a video. In May, Attorney General Bondi reportedly told Trump that his name had indeed appeared multiple times throughout the Epstein files. And not long thereafter, in July, you and the Attorney General released a memo claiming that, quote, no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. In a few short months, how did you go from being a crusader for accountability and transparency for the Epstein files to being a part of the conspiracy and cover-up? The answer is simple. You said it yourself, because of who's on that list. Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein over the years is well documented. A week ago, the Oversight Committee released Trump's disturbing birthday book, Note to Epstein, written over a drawing of a woman's naked body, referring to a, quote, wonderful secret. The Oversight Committee obtained the note from the Epstein estate, not from the FBI, raising questions again of whether the FBI has been withholding documents. While you're unleashing the FBI to cater to Trump's desire to shut down the Epstein inquiry, the first 9 months of the Trump presidency have seen a spate of political violence and domestic terror events. We saw deadly attacks on political figures on both the left and the right. The brutal assassination of Minnesota Democratic House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, and the attempted murder of Democratic State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, who miraculously survived a combined 17 gunshots. We saw an arsonist set Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence on fire. And of course, last week, we saw the horrific, cold-blooded assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah that has shaken the nation. 1 minute after Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck, a 16-year-old shooter in Evergreen, Colorado, radicalized by white supremacist ideology online, opened fire and critically wounded 2 other students at Evergreen High School. We've seen lethal anti-Semitic violence, including the murder of 2 young Israeli embassy staffers just blocks from the Capitol, and then in the attack on a gathering of Jewish people in support of hostages held in Gaza in Boulder in June. We've seen continued mass shootings at schools, like the domestic terror incident at a Catholic school in Minneapolis last month, which killed 2 children and wounded 18 others. And in August, a man fired more than 500 bullets at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, killing a police officer who was a Marine veteran and a father. People like Melissa Hortman and Charlie Kirk should be able to participate in politics as elected officials or active citizens without being shot down in cold blood in the United States of America. People should also be able to go to elementary school, to middle school, to high school, to work, to the mall, and to church without being shot down in explosions of gun violence. The important position at the FBI requires a leader who puts public safety and national security and the rule of law first. I'm afraid, Director Patel, you've given us reason to believe you've used the powers of the FBI to serve Donald Trump and his agenda of partisan retribution. You've broken your promise not to do that. You've betrayed Jeffrey Epstein's victims and survivors. You've turned your back on the career law enforcement officers of the FBI, and as a result, you've left all of us less safe than before. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. I imagine that in a hearing about threats to freedom of speech abroad, we might hear from a Russian dissident about Putin's massive violations of political freedom, or the death of Alexei Navalny in prison, or perhaps a Chinese pro-democracy activist about President Xi's attacks on free speech in Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, or the persecution trial of Jimmy Lai. Or maybe a journalist about the Saudi Crown Prince's assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post writer who demanded freedom from religious persecution and oppression in Saudi Arabia. But no, the dictators of the world have got nothing to fear from this hearing. The Republicans called it to attack our democratic allies in Europe. The star witness is not a human rights leader like Navalny, but a far-right, pro-Putin politician who leads the UK Reform Party, a party that has 4 members out of 650 members in the parliament. He calls England an authoritarian regime, while saying that Vladimir Putin is the world leader he admires the most. Well, this hearing mimics Vice President J.D. Vance, who went to the Munich Security Conference in February, and in the first 2 minutes of his speech, whitewashed the world's leading autocratic regimes, proclaiming that the threat that worries him is not Russia. It's not China, he said, but rather it's our European allies. Amazing. Republicans are promoting far-right parties in Europe, like Alternative for Deutschland, Reform UK, and Rassemblement National Français, and ignoring massive repression in Russia, China, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and among all the autocrats of the world. Republicans are vilifying European liberal democracies simply for engaging in the kind of line-drawing exercises that we Americans engage in under our First Amendment with respect to the epidemic of child pornography, protecting children from other harmful content, defamatory speech, online scams and false advertising, and speech inciting riots and imminent lawless action. All forms of speech that the First Amendment does not protect and whose tricky contours must still be drawn by law. We could have a meaningful hearing on this complicated subject, but this hearing is just a drive-by hit against a strong Democratic ally to benefit a Donald Trump sycophant and wannabe. But it's even worse than this. Not only are our colleagues ignoring intensifying repression in the world's dictatorships, they're also trying to distract the world from the attack on freedom taking place right here in America every single day. Americans aren't worried about the EU or the Online Safety Act in the UK. We're not worried about white nationalists not having enough license to incite lynch mobs to set immigrants on fire in their bedrooms. Americans are worried that Donald Trump is working to rewrite and whitewash American history in our museums, our textbooks, and our national parks, to destroy PBS, NPR, and public broadcasting, to ban books in our libraries, and to censor any news stories critical of him by installing political henchmen in private broadcast rooms. Americans know that academic freedom is in danger when the administration cancels and withholds billions of dollars in scientific and medical research funding from American universities, even for urgent life-saving studies about breast cancer or heart attacks, as a way to force schools to impose government orthodoxy on curriculum, hiring, admissions, and any student and faculty speech that MAGA considers politically incorrect. Americans see Trump trying to harass, intimidate, control, and shut down the press, like ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, and PBS. The Republican-controlled FCC essentially blackmailed media companies Skydance and Paramount into agreeing to install a spy, a monitor, a minder, I think the Brits might say, to police CBS News programs to make sure that they are being sufficiently Trumpy in giving us the news in order to get approval of a merger from FCC. Meanwhile, Trump sued 60 Minutes and CBS personally for $20 billion for the frivolous cause of action that he thought an interview with Kamala Harris was edited too favorably, and then walked away with a cool $16 million in a shakedown settlement for his library, all part of a now familiar pattern. When Trump doesn't like the news, he sues the broadcaster and unleashes the FCC on them until they pay up and agree to a government spy stationed in their office. Free speech is so much in danger in the US today that if the government tries to violate our rights, we might not even be able to find a lawyer to defend ourselves because Trump is systematically exacting retribution against law firms that represent anyone on the other side of a case against him. Look, our country loves free speech. We fight for free speech. We fought for free speech, and we know it's in danger when students who are lawfully in the United States are taken off the street and arrested without warrants by masked federal agents in unmarked cars for writing an article or attending a rally that Stephen Miller doesn't like. Free speech is in danger when visitors to our country have their social media accounts screened at the border for any criticism of Donald Trump. Free speech is in danger when To Kill a Mockingbird, The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, and The Kite Runner are banned from our schools and libraries across the country, and even families defending our freedom abroad have to fight for their kids' right to read freely in public schools run by the Department of Defense. Freedom's in danger when the administration tramples the civil service rights of hundreds of thousands of nonpartisan expert civil servants. These civil servants have been protected against political discrimination for more than a century to maintain the excellence and independence of our federal workforce, but they're now being fired simply for doing their jobs, like prosecuting violent criminals and insurrectionists who try to overthrow our government and attack our police officers, or because they honestly gave honest economic information and labor statistics to the public. These honorable civil servants are being fired because they won't be the political hacks Trump demands that they be. When private comments made by federal employees are scrutinized for anti-Trump bias and they can lose their jobs because of it, then we've entered the realm not just of Vladimir Putin, but of Joseph Stalin. Now, Mr. Trump and Mr. Farage both claim they're protectors of free speech, but they only want to protect speech they agree with.
The Right Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Farage, is recognised.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chairman Jordan, for inviting me here today. And it turns out, with news in the last 48 hours, to have been really rather timely. I'm delighted to reacquaint with the charming Mr. Raskin. It was delightful testimony you gave me earlier on with your speech. But hey, that's fine. You can say what you like. I don't care, because that's what free speech is. And in a sense, this has all been going wrong now for a couple of decades. We've kind of forgotten the Voltairean principles that we'll fight and defend to the death your right to say something that we fundamentally disagree with. That is the absolute foundation, if you think about it, of free speech, of democracy, of living in freedom. It's kind of why we fought 2 world wars at massive, massive cost to defend that very principle for ourselves and for many, many others around the country. And I first became worried about all this with cancel culture. You know, the idea that we can't have this speaker go to a university because some people might be offended by what he or she have to say. It is important to note that there is not a parent in the United Kingdom, and I would guess it's the same for America too, that is not concerned about content their children as minors can find on the internet. Not a single parent that is not concerned about this. But at the moment, we're not finding the right solutions. I do myself begin to think that hardware might be one of the solutions, that laptops, that handsets could be programmed so that many, many apps and many, many services simply aren't available from these devices. But what we've done is to go down the legislative route. And it's extraordinary that, you know, I come from the land of Magna Carta. I come from the land that gave us the mother of parliaments, and it doesn't give me any great joy to be sitting in America and describing the really awful authoritarian situation that we have now sunk into.
Now, Mr. Farage, first of all, to be called charming by you, a man of your evident erudition and dazzling brilliance, is undoubtedly a Lifetime Achievement Award for me, so I will hold it closely. But I wanted to ask you about your commitment to the freedom of speech universally. I think it's a principle that you advocate for everyone, not just for people who are in your party or people you agree with. You said that there should not have been a protest against the Gaza war in the UK. And then when it went ahead, the police refused to shut it down. You called them gutless for not shutting it down. Do you regret having opposed that, given that there was no violence there and there were 700,000 people who wanted to express themselves that day?
I have not opposed people standing up and protesting in favor of people living in Gaza at all. There was one particular day, and it was the Sunday nearest November the 11th, which was when we had big memorial services in London, and I think a march being allowed to go ahead on that day would have been a mistake. Any other day, fine.
Oh, I see. Who gets to decide that?
Well, I think actually something that is embedded in the country, something that is absolutely fundamental to vote.
That's why we have a written constitution. You might take that idea back to the UK with you.
Well,
because the freedom of speech applies 365 days a year here under the First Amendment, not 364 or 363, depending on some politicians heckling the government and telling them to shut down free speech.
We have allowed mass pro-Gaza demonstrations in London, weekend after weekend.
No thanks to you. All right, let me change.
This was let
me try another one.
Sensitive day. That's all.
I got you. It was a sensitive day. And I thought that's what the freedom of speech was about. You have a right to engage in speech that other people consider offensive or insensitive. But in any event, you've made yourself clear, Mr. Farage.
64 days a year if they want.
You've made yourself clear to your constituents in Claxton today. Let me ask you this. You've banned journalists from your political events that you disagree with, haven't you?
No, in fact, I'm the only political
Really?
leader
At your
in Britain.
convention, you didn't ban journalists and revoke their credentials?
You know, I take the average press conference, I take 25 questions.
No, that wasn't my question. Mr. Farage, we're politicians, so we see what you're doing. I'm asking you a direct question.
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased
I'm
you
asking
do.
you a direct question, and I hope you can answer it. Why do you ban journalists who oppose your views from coming to your events? Why did you tell your party, why did you tell the local government not to do interviews with your local newspaper?
I am the most open person to any journalist.
Undoubtedly, you're the handsomest man in the world. But I'm asking you a different question, okay? That's not my question. My question for you is, and it's legit, why do you ban journalists that you disagree with from your political events, like from your convention?
I don't.
Okay, and you say you've never done that?
I can't think, if I go back the last 25 years, I can't think of banning anybody. But I mean, maybe somebody else did. But look, I see. It was somebody else who did it. I do more. I take more questions.
All right.
From journalists.
Do you have any
all the other
objections?
leaders added up together.
Okay, Mr. Price, let me ask you. You're an honest man. Do you have any objection to the things you've heard about what Donald Trump is doing in the United States of America, going after law firms, for example, banning them from federal buildings and federal courthouses, stripping them of security clearance, saying they can never get federal jobs or contracts because he doesn't like something one of the lawyers at the firm did? Do you think there's a First Amendment problem with that, as our courts have found?
There's a lot of information you've put into that. It's good to talk to you again after London.
Yeah, have you followed that at all?
I haven't. I have to be perfectly honest with you now.
Okay, do you have any problems with anything Donald Trump has done with respect to free speech and freedom of expression in America? Or you just haven't followed it?
I'm not as well. There are plenty of people here better informed on American matters than I.
And we are. So thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. My guess is Mr. Farage takes press questions probably as often as President Trump does. These are two guys who aren't afraid to talk to the press and take any question that comes to them. We've seen that display time and time again.